When an avoidant starts letting you in, even just for a moment, it's not by accident. It's not a slip. It's not weakness. It's calculated, unconscious courage. And that right there is what separates someone who's tolerating your presence from someone who's secretly falling for you. Most people miss this because they're looking for the obvious signs of love. The passionate declarations, the daily check-ins, the clingy behaviors. Those are the trademarks of someone who's comfortable with closeness. But avoidants, they love differently. They love like someone walking on glass, carefully, methodically, terrified of bleeding, but moving forward anyway. See, to the avoidant, intimacy is not a joyride. It's a psychological exposure. Vulnerability feels like danger. So when they do let their guard down, even slightly, it's the equivalent of someone handing you their armor in the middle of a battlefield. A glance that lingers too long. A story from their past that carries emotional weight. A rare "I miss you" text at 1:37 a.m. after 3 days of silence. You think that was just a moment? No. That was a microscopic rebellion against their own defenses. And here's the key. They won't do it often. They won't do it loudly. But when they do, pay attention. Because they are revealing the very thing they spent years hiding. Emotional investment. That sliver of openness may seem insignificant to someone used to high emotional output. But for the avoidant, that's a revolution. That's the nervous system overriding years of self-protection. Now, why does this matter? Because if you're not aware of this dynamic, you'll misread it. You'll think they're being inconsistent, hot and cold, unavailable. And sure, on the surface, it might look like that. But at a deeper level, what you're witnessing is emotional turbulence caused by suppressed attachment wounds. When someone who's been conditioned to avoid love starts feeling it, their instinct is to retreat. But the paradox, the more they care, the more they struggle to hide it. Their subtle openness is their nervous system leaking affection. So when you notice those micro moments, when they remember something you said 3 weeks ago, when they show up unexpectedly, when they ask a question that's deeper than usual, you're not just witnessing kindness, you're witnessing internal conflict. Part of them is trying to maintain control. The other part is breaking through. Love isn't comfortable for them. It's risky. And their moments of openness are not just behaviors. They are battles won. Philosophically, we have to understand that love doesn't look the same through every lens. The avoidant lens sees love as both longing and loss. They crave connection, but fear dependence. So when they allow you into their inner world, they are confronting the very wiring that told them connection is dangerous. And that moment, that's a breakthrough. That's the emotional equivalent of someone who's been afraid of heights, stepping onto the edge of the cliff and not backing away. This is where most people get it wrong. They demand more openness, more communication, more clarity, without realizing how much the avoidant has already stretched to give them what little they did. That emotional crumb, it's a feast if you understand what it cost them to give it. Love for the avoidant doesn't come wrapped in romance. It comes clothed into everyday behavior. If you're paying attention, it's unmistakable. And here's the real power. The more emotionally safe you remain during those openings, not reactive, not needy, not trying to crack them open, but grounded, compassionate, and secure, the more they will want to let you in again. Love to them is earned through emotional safety, not emotional demand. When you become a space where their guardedness doesn't have to be punished or forced open, you stop being a threat and start becoming a refuge. That's when real intimacy begins. So the next time they send a thoughtful message or their eyes tell you a story they don't have the words for, don't overlook it. Don't rush it. Don't drown it in expectation. Recognize it for what it is. A silent scream from their heart saying, I don't know how to love out loud, but I'm trying. Because for the avoidance, love doesn't arrive in fireworks. It arrives in flickers. And if you learn to see those flickers, not as insufficiencies, but as sacred signs of progress, you'll stop chasing explosions and start honoring the spark. And that spark, if protected, can burn through every wall they've ever built. If you can hold space for the flicker, you'll ignite the kind of love that even they didn't know they were capable of giving. When an avoidant pulls away, the first assumption most people make is that it's over, that the connection meant nothing, that the silence is a sign of disinterest, maybe even contempt. But that assumption, while emotionally understandable, is psychologically false. Because here's what most people don't realize. An avoidance distance is not always a sign of rejection. In fact, when they're in love, their silence is often the clearest evidence that something powerful is happening inside them, something they don't yet know how to handle. Let's get brutally honest about this. Love threatens the avoidant sense of control. It disrupts their internal system. Their independence isn't just a personality trait, it's a shield. It's how they survived emotionally. And when real love shows up, it triggers their deepest fears of engulfment, loss of identity, and emotional exposure. So they do what they've trained themselves to do. They pull back, but this pullback is not always about you. Sometimes it's about them trying to regulate emotions that are becoming too intense to manage. Here's the paradox. The more they feel, the more they withdraw. Not because they don't care, but because they care too much. Their nervous system is overloaded. Love isn't a gentle experience for them. It's an existential shakeup. And so they create distance. But it's not disengagement. It's not detachment. It's strategic emotional survival. Their body and mind are screaming for space, not because they want to erase you, but because they're trying to avoid drowning in the tidal wave of their own affection. That's why no contact phases are so often misread. People assume the avoidant has moved on, that they're cold, unbothered. But you have to understand, avoidants are not expressive processors. They don't sort through emotions with words or reach out for comfort. They do it in silence, in withdrawal, in solitude. If they're still thinking about you while they're silent, that silence becomes their emotional processing chamber. That's where their clarity builds. That's where their fear wrestles with their desire. That's where their mind plays out every what if, every missed opportunity, every imagined conversation. And you want to know something even more revealing? If they didn't care, if the connection meant nothing, they wouldn't need to pull back at all. Indifference doesn't trigger avoidance. Emotional impact does. Their silence is often not about wanting to lose you, but about fearing they're losing themselves. They're not running from you. They're running from how deeply you've touched something in them they haven't yet made peace with. That's why space is so crucial in this dance. If you chase, if you demand answers, if you overreach, you confirm their worst fear, that intimacy means suffocation. But if you hold your ground, if you stay calm, grounded, self-assured, you offer them something they've rarely experienced: connection without pressure, love without demand, intimacy that doesn't rob them of autonomy. Now let's look deeper. On a philosophical level, this avoidance is about the human battle between freedom and connection. Every one of us wants both, but avoidants are dominated by the fear that love will cost them their freedom. So when you come into their life and ignite real emotions, they instinctively step back to reclaim their internal space. But when that silence is handled with wisdom, when you don't chase, don't collapse, don't lash out, you send a radically different message. I don't need to control you to love you. And that, for the avoidant, is revolutionary. That's when they start to return, not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but because your absence didn't feel like punishment, it felt like peace. And they begin to realize you are the rare person who doesn't demand access, but still feels safe to come back to. And don't mistake their return as just checking in. For the avoidant, circling back, especially after silence, is a confession. It's an act of emotional surrender. They've battled themselves in the dark. They've felt the fear, the guilt, the longing, and now they're choosing to re-engage. That choice is not random. It's deliberate. It's their nervous system whispering, go back to the place that didn't try to cage you, but didn't abandon you either. So the next time they disappear, ask yourself this: are they really gone? Or are they in the only space where they've ever felt safe enough to process something that's never felt safe before? Love. Don't confuse distance with disinterest. Sometimes the deepest love speaks in silence, and only those who understand the language of space will ever hear it. You have to understand something most people completely overlook when dealing with avoidance. They don't initiate emotional vulnerability, but they absolutely mirror it. This is where things get subtle, and if you're not paying attention, you'll miss the most telling sign that an avoidant is secretly in love with you. See, avoidants aren't wired to lead with emotional transparency. That's not how they were conditioned. Their early experiences taught them that vulnerability equals danger. So their instinct is to stay guarded, controlled, self-contained. But when they meet someone emotionally grounded, someone who can hold space without demanding, pressuring, or overreaching, they start to mirror that emotional tone. And that mirroring, that's not imitation. That's resonance. That's emotional calibration. That's love. Spoken in the only language they trust, behavior. Avoidants don't know how to say I'm falling for you in words. That phrase is foreign. It's exposed. So what do instead? They start to reflect the parts of you that feel emotionally safe. They adjust their tone to match yours. They begin responding instead of avoiding. They subtly align with your values, your rhythm, your emotional expressions. Not because they're faking it, but because they finally feel safe enough to try. Watch closely. They start texting at the same pace you do. They use words or phrases you've used before, almost unconsciously. They become more present when they used to retreat. When you're calm, they're calm. When you speak with clarity, they stop dodging and start responding with more directness. That's not coincidence. That's emotional evolution in real time. And it's a clear sign you've broken through the wall. But here's a caveat. If you try to force them to open up before they're ready, you kill the process. You short-circuit the trust. Because mirroring only happens when the nervous system isn't under threat. If they feel emotionally cornered, they regress. But if you remain rooted, authentic, and unattached to an outcome, they'll begin to model your energy. Because they want to feel how you feel. You become the emotional thermostat, and they start matching the temperature without even realizing it. Think about this philosophically. Love in its purest form is not just about expression. It's about alignment. It's about two people co-regulating each other's nervous systems in a way that feels effortless. And avoidance, they don't trust words. They trust consistency. They don't believe declarations of love. They believe demonstrated safety. So when they start mirroring your emotional energy, it's not a performance. It's a recalibration of their identity in your presence. That's not just connection. That's transformation. And make no mistake, this isn't just a romantic impulse. This is neuroscience at work. Mirror neurons in the brain are wired to reflect the emotional states of people we are deeply connected to. For the avoidant, whose brain has been trained to block out intimacy, this mirroring is profound. It means their guard is slipping, their biology is shifting, they're no longer in fight or flight mode around you, they're observing, internalizing, and trusting. And that trust, that is love in its most fragile, most powerful form. The mistake many people make is expecting the avoidant to lead the emotional dance, but they can't. That's like asking someone who's never learned to swim to jump into deep water and perform laps. They follow first. They study you. They learn safety through your consistency. And once they trust that emotional space, they slowly begin to reflect it back. So when you see that shift, When the avoidant who once deflected questions starts asking you how you feel. When the one who used to keep things surface level starts dipping into deeper waters, don't dismiss it. Don't rush it. Don't try to define it too quickly. Recognize it for what it is, a sacred exchange, a relational mirror, proof that your emotional strength is reprogramming their story about connection. And the irony? They may never say I love you the way you expect it, but they will show you in the way they begin to become more like you, in how they soften, how they stay a little longer in the moment, how they adapt, not to please you, but because your presence feels like peace. So ask yourself this: are you paying attention to the reflection in the mirror? Because sometimes the loudest I love you doesn't come in a phrase. It comes in a subtle shift, a mirrored moment, a behavioral echo. And only the emotionally intelligent will recognize it. If they're reflecting you, they're trusting you. And if they're trusting you, they're already halfway in love. Here's the paradox that almost nobody talks about. When someone with an avoidant attachment style begins to love you, they don't become easier. They often become more difficult. But not in the way you think, not in a cruel, detached, manipulative way. The difficulty comes from the fact that they're at war with themselves. They want you close, but closeness threatens their emotional survival. So instead of expressing that inner chaos, they test you. They push, they trigger, and then they watch. Here's what's fascinating. An avoidant who doesn't care about you won't even bother to get triggered. They'll disappear. They'll detach. They'll ghost without a second thought because you were never emotionally significant enough to challenge their system. But when they do care, when they do start to fall for you, your presence starts disrupting their internal patterns. You bring things to the surface that they've kept buried for years. Abandonment wounds, fears of engulfment, deep hidden questions about whether they're worthy of love. And when those emotions rise, so does their anxiety. So what do? They retreat. But here's the sign most people miss. They don't stay gone, they come back. They circle around, maybe not perfectly, maybe not with grand apologies or open-hearted confessions, but they return. They test the connection again, not because they're playing games, but because they're trying to survive love without losing themselves. You see, real love isn't just beautiful, it's confrontational. It exposes what's been unresolved. And for the avoidant, this is brutal. They've spent most of their life building emotional armor to keep others out, to feel safe, to stay in control. But love is the one force powerful enough to crack that armor. That's why when you hold a boundary, when you demand clarity, when you stop chasing love, they get triggered, not because you did anything wrong, but because your strength represents everything they fear and everything they crave. Now, pay attention to this part. When you hold that boundary and they don't leave permanently, that's not avoidance. That's conflict. That's internal struggle. They're walking through their fear and still choosing you, even if it's clumsy, even if it's slow. That choice, that return, that willingness to stay in the discomfort, that is love in disguise. Avoidants don't fall in love with people who make them feel safe by catering to their fear. They fall in love with people who are emotionally sovereign. People who say, I want you, but I don't need to chase you to feel valuable. That emotional posture, firm, calm, grounded, is what triggers both their fear and their fascination, because on a subconscious level, it teaches them something they've never experienced before. Intimacy doesn't have to cost you your freedom. Let's step back and view this from a psychological lens. The moment an avoidant gets triggered by your boundary, yet doesn't leave, they're learning emotional resilience. They're rewiring their nervous system in real time. Their brain is absorbing a new reality. Connection doesn't always mean collapse. That's why it matters how you respond in those moments. If you react with panic, if you rush in, if you try to fix them, you affirm their belief that intimacy is invasive. But if you stay rooted, firm, and compassionate, You become the anchor they never had. And this is crucial. Their return isn't about you soothing their ego. It's about their soul realizing, I felt something I didn't know how to handle, and I still came back. That's the real confession. That's their version of saying, I'm afraid, but you're worth it. So stop looking for the perfectly articulated apology, the overly romantic gesture. That's not their language. Their language is return after rupture. It's effort after conflict. It's the slow, often messy attempt to re-engage after their system screamed at them to run. And if you can recognize that pattern for what it is, not failure, but a form of emotional growth, you'll see what most people miss. You'll understand that love for the avoidant isn't about staying calm the whole time. It's about being pulled apart by fear and still choosing to come closer anyway. If they get triggered and don't walk away for good, they're not rejecting you. They're revealing that you matter more than their comfort. And for an avoidant, that is love at its loudest. Avoidants don't change for just anyone. That's the part most people underestimate. These individuals are deeply committed to their routines, their autonomy, their sense of emotional control. Their lives are built on structure, habits that give them stability and space from emotional overwhelm. But when they start making subtle shifts in their routine around you, it's never random. It's not just convenience. Is love showing up where they least expected it? Inside their own resistance. You have to understand that for an avoidant, consistency isn't just preference, it's protection. Predictable schedules, emotional distance, and compartmentalized time are how they regulate their nervous system. It's how they avoid overstimulation. So when they begin to rearrange their patterns to include you, that's not just a logistical change, it's a seismic emotional shift. It's their nervous system adapting to accommodate something in someone they weren't prepared to feel this strongly about. Think about it. They used to start their mornings with total solitude. Now suddenly they're texting you first thing in the morning. They used to guard their evenings for unwinding, meaning avoiding contact. But now they're carving out space to talk, to check in, to just hear your voice. They never remembered birthdays, but now they're recalling little details you thought they forgot. That's not them becoming more polite. That's them becoming emotionally invested. Most people miss this because they're looking for grand romantic gestures. But an avoidant love doesn't express through drama. They express through adjustment. Their schedule becomes more flexible. Their availability widens. Their resistance starts to soften. Slowly, imperceptibly, they begin to rewire their routines to make room for you. Not because they're pressured, but because they want to. And that wanting, that voluntary shift is what makes it real. You might be tempted to dismiss these changes because they don't feel big enough. But what looks small from the outside is actually monumental from the inside. You're watching someone who spent their entire life preserving space begin to give some of that space to you. That's not just connection, that's sacrifice. And for an avoidant, sacrificing their time, their routine, or their emotional distance is the highest form of affection they know how to give. Psychologically, this is profound. You're witnessing a transformation of identity because routines for the avoidant are tied to control, and control is tied to emotional safety. When they begin loosening the grip on those patterns, it means you've created a space where they feel emotionally safe enough to risk vulnerability. They're no longer just protecting their old world, they're opening themselves to build a new one with you in it. This is where emotional intelligence becomes crucial. If you demand too much change too fast, you disrupt the very trust you're trying to build. But if you notice and acknowledge these small shifts, without pressure, without expectation, you reinforce the behavior, you reward the vulnerability, and they begin to associate change not with chaos, but with connection. And don't be fooled, this isn't about convenience. This isn't about them suddenly having extra time. No one ever finds time, they make it. And when they start making time for you, when they begin showing up where they used to withdraw, when they start prioritizing shared experiences over personal space, they're not just being kind, they're declaring something. Without needing to say the words, philosophically, love is not about interruption, it's about integration. When someone integrates you into the very rhythms that once excluded everyone else, that is the quiet revolution of intimacy. It's not about giving up their independence, it's about evolving it. It's about discovering that true connection doesn't require abandonment of self, but rather the expansion of it. And the most powerful thing you can do in return? Don't overlook these shifts. Don't minimize them for what they are. Acts of unspoken devotion. Show appreciation not through neediness, but through presence, through being emotionally consistent yourself. When the avoidant senses that you respect their evolution, that you don't demand but deeply witness, they lean in even more. Because now love no longer feels like loss, it feels like growth. If they're changing their world to make room for you, it means you've already changed their heart. And for an avoidant, that's not routine, it's a revolution. There's one behavior that reveals more about an avoidant's love than anything else, and it's the one most people misinterpret. So when they try to push you away, not because they don't care, but because deep down, they care too much. That's the heartbreak hidden in plain sight. When an avoidant starts feeling vulnerable, their first instinct isn't to draw closer, it's to protect themselves. And they do that by retreating, by going cold, by acting like you don't matter, all while silently hoping you'll stay. This is where it gets psychologically intense. Love for the avoidant is not comforting, it's threatening. It activates parts of their nervous system that have been dormant since childhood. That deep fear of being engulfed, of losing themselves, of needing someone and getting hurt for it, it all rises to the surface. And when those feelings get too loud, their defense system kicks in. That's when they emotionally push, act indifferent, even say things that seem cruel or confusing, but it's not hatred, it's fear. Fear of how deeply they're beginning to care. And here's the paradox. When they push, they're watching. Not in an obvious way, but psychologically, they're observing how you respond. They want to see if you'll chase. They want to see if you'll explode. They want to know, will you try to control me? Will you collapse? Or will you stay centered? Because if you can stay emotionally calm, grounded, unattached, but still present, you signal to them something they've never seen before: safety inside strength. A love that doesn't demand. An attachment that doesn't threaten. Now understand this. When an avoidant is trying to push you away, they are simultaneously testing you and betraying themselves. Because deep down, they don't want you to go. They just want to know that your presence isn't a trap. That they can feel what they're feeling without being consumed by it. So their emotional push isn't about ending the relationship. It's about creating distance to see if love can survive space. And if it can, they start to believe in it for the first time. But most people fail this test. They take the push personally. They argue. They beg. They withdraw completely. And to the avoidant, that confirms everything they feared. Love really is dangerous. People really do leave. But if you do the opposite, if you respect the space,